Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Today is Friday, October 9th. Juma Mubarak. Welcome to some new faces and our old faces, mashallah. It's nice to see you. Thank you for joining us. We are going to be, hopefully, inshallah, live streaming to Facebook today. It's not working at the moment, so I will continue to try to do that as we are going along. But to announce our speakers for today, so Brother Iftekhar will be giving the fifth part of his series on living Islam with purpose. And Sister Maha is joining us again, mashallah, for the reflections on Al-Hay, one of the beautiful names of God. So mashallah, really looking forward to today's Khatera. For those of you that are unaware, we do have a new Facebook page. Please like our Facebook page. It is, to be clear, it's Mainline Muslim Society -MLMS. And if you're interested, we have a WhatsApp group that there's a link on our page to join that. This way you can keep up with all of our goings on. So Brother Iftekhar, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you everyone again for joining us.
Thank you, Nicole. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. Allah reminds us, يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. You who believe, be mindful of Allah as is His due, and make sure you devote yourselves to Him to your dying moment. And it reminds us, يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا. People, be mindful of your Lord who created you from a single soul, and from it created its mate, and from the pair of them spread countless men and women far and wide. Be mindful of Allah, in whose name you make requests of one another. Beware of severing the ties of kinship. Allah is always watching over you. So inshallah, today we continue on the concept of respect of dissent in our tradition. And last time we looked at some basic definitions, which we will review very briefly again, for which I will share a screen. And share that screen now. So we covered the notion that in the Muslim tradition, dissent arises as a result of how we view text, how we view the two major source texts, the Quran and the Sunnah. And when we think about text, we always ask two questions. What is the text? That is, the words of the text. And how was it transmitted to us? And then we also ask, what does the text mean? Whether there is more than one possible meaning, whether there is only one possible meaning. And these are the two ideas that we negotiate in order to be certain about what the text is telling us. And in some cases, the text has been transmitted to us in a massively parallel way, so we are 100% certain of it. And we say that we have definitive, categorically authoritative understanding and knowledge of it, hence this term categorically authoritative. And in other cases where we are not, where we have a probability of it being transmitted to us, we call it presumptively authoritative, and that is the content of the text. When we come to the meaning of the text, if there is a single possible meaning, then we declare that text in its meaning to be categorically authoritative. And if it has more than one meaning, then it is presumptively authoritative. And this is where our tradition of respecting dissent arises. Because when there are more than one possible meaning, our tradition has dictated that we respect the multiplicity of possible meanings. And we then organize our interactions with each other on the basis of the possibility of these multiple meanings. So if one of us prefers one meaning over the other, with obviously due argumentation and due support linguistically and rationally. Um, Dissent is not a license for mere opinion and mere difference, right? So the dissent in the Muslim tradition is not merely somebody having an opinion without any grounding in language or rhetoric or rational, logical methods of argumentation. They must be sound. They must be based on sound arguments, on sound proofs, on sound context. So it is very rigorous. But in that process of rigor, if one disagrees in the tradition, and we are talking about disagreement among scholars at the moment, then that disagreement is respected, and that disagreement is protected, right? So scholars created this very protected space where dissent could occur. So today, what we will do is look at a very specific example and recognize this immense tradition of dissent that arose. And I'm going to stop sharing this for a minute. So we will look at the tradition of dissent that arose and how the scholars themselves respected each other and promoted that respect for dissent, while at the same time holding on to their particular point of view and promoting their particular point of view. And this is the importance of this respecting and respect of dissent that we want to understand. And then hopefully in our communal lives, with each other, in our interactions with each other, adopt this sense of respecting dissent. So the Prophet ﷺ is reported to have said the following statement. He said, and I'm going to do this whole exercise in English, obviously, in order to illustrate the point, rather than in the Arabic. So the Prophet said what can be understood in the English language to be as follows: whoever brings dead land to life shall own it. Whoever brings dead land to life shall own it. And here, here, the text itself has been reported to us through a single chain of narration. So it's ahad, and in terms of its content and its chain of authority, it is presumptively authoritative. So it's not at the level of the Quran, it's not mutawatir. Nevertheless, the words are very clear. There is no disagreement as to what the words mean in terms of grammar and in terms of semantics. So where does the difference arise? The difference arises in our understanding, in the scholarly understanding of what was the context in which the Prophet spoke and made this statement, right? And we know that when we look at prophetic statements, we classify all prophetic statements in one of four categories. We either accept the prophetic statement in his role as the universal lawgiver, that is the Prophet of God, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or we think of him as opining or stating or making facts or statements as the head of state in the case when he was the head of state of Medina, or a third role that we classify his words within is a judge when he made decisions in cases between people. And the fourth and final category, which is a fairly large category, is that he is a human being and he is an individual person with likes and dislikes that are not obligatory on us. He liked certain foods, disliked certain foods. They are not taken in the tradition to be commandments to his followers. But when he spoke as a universal lawgiver, as the Prophet of God, then all of it was taken as commandments to his followers. So these are multiple ways we classify. With this particular hadith, whoever brings dead land to life shall own it. When Imam Abu Hanifa dealt with this, so let us now see how the differentiation and the dissent arose. When Imam Abu Hanifa looked at this hadith, he understood this to have been said by the Prophet ﷺ as the administrative head of Medina, which is the head of state of Medina. And so in his mind, the Prophet said this with respect to Medina in his role as the administrative head. And if this hadith is ever to be used in another context, it must be done in the context of an administrative role, right? So an individual cannot simply state this and act upon it. It must be an administrative role that is recognized by people as the administrative head or as an administrative role, and that is how it may be used in the future. So it is restricted in its use, and it must be used by an administrative individual or entity, and they may decide that this hadith is applicable, or they may decide it is not applicable. And in further in the point of view of Abu Hanifa, he felt that this could be used as long as similar conditions to the time of the Prophet and to his thinking about this issue are met in the future. So this is Imam Abu Hanifa's view. Imam Malik held a very similar view. However, he said that the administrative entity or individual who makes this decision can only control this application within the cultivated lands that surround a city or a town. Remember, they are living at a time and a space where, unlike the time and space we live in the context of the United States or in the context of any nation state, where all lands that are not owned specifically by an individual are automatically owned by the state. Right? This is our reality in the 21st century. That's not the reality in the context of which Imam Malik is speaking. Even though there was a khilafah, even though there was a administrative state, in their minds and at that time, Imam Malik declared that this hadith can be applied to those lands that immediately surround the town that are potentially cultivated, so that it must be controlled. But if these are lands outside of these green belts, these harim, around a settled town, then, and if somebody comes and just settles on a piece of land that's uncultivated and then cultivates it, he then owns it. Now, obviously, this hadith can never be applied in this understanding in our modern context. It is impossible to apply it because all land that is unowned by any individual is lands owned by the state automatically. Let's look at a third view, Imam al-Shafi'i's view. Imam al-Shafi'i, and this is part of his methodology, said that, or he held that every statement of the Prophet is in the context of a universal lawgiver, that is, as a messenger of God. So then it is applicable at all times and at all places for all followers of the Prophet ﷺ. And he equated it essentially to salah or to fasting. That is, if you pray or if you fast, the commandment came from the words of the Prophet ﷺ, and they're applicable to all who claim to follow the Prophet. In a similar fashion, he categorized this hadith like he would do all hadith in this category. In his opinion, you had to make a counter argument to say it was not universally applicable. So in his methodology, he considered it as universally applicable, and if there was any fallow land, any land unused, and you cultivated it, you owned it. That was his understanding. Clearly, again, I would reiterate, that is not an understanding we could ever apply as an example in the United States, or even in majority Muslim countries, because in all majority Muslim countries that I'm aware of, all land that is unowned by an individual or a corporation or an entity is automatically owned by the state. And so this hadith essentially becomes non-applicable. And so that is for us in the current time. But in the classical period, when these opinions were formulated, one can see the amazing dissent that arose based on sound and appropriate and accepted methodology. And the methodology between these imams, these founders of our eponymous schools of jurisprudence, there were shared methodologies that took approximately 100 plus years and more to develop and to become established. But nevertheless, they understood that differences would arise and they respected that dissent. So this is an important principle that we can learn from in our daily lives, that with the same statement and the same set of rules and regulations or words, that is the words of the Quran or the words of the Sunnah, the statements of the Prophet, we can come to variations in our understanding of those texts. The ulama also did something very, very interesting. They also said, in order to avoid dissent within those ideas and those principles on which we all agree, right? Because if we begin to disagree on fundamentals, then there is no community left, there's no society left, there's no systemic ability to rely on each other on fundamentals that remain. So one of the most important principles in the definition of Islamic orthodoxy is the notion of heresy. What is it that puts you outside of the pale of Islam? And scholars from the very beginning agreed that heresy is limited to a handful of things. It is limited to the 5 pillars. That is, if you as a Muslim deny any one of those 5 pillars, only then can the rest of the community look to you as somebody outside of the pale of Islam. Or the 6 fundamental beliefs, right? If you deny any one of these 6 or more, then you are outside of the pale of Islam. And there might be 1 or 2 more things that constitutes the fundamentals of Islam on which everybody agrees. And it is only on these things that disagreement puts you outside the pale of Islam. If disagreements arose, as in the case of the hadith that we just discussed, that doesn't put you out of the pale of Islam. You're still a Muslim. You will still be respected by your fellow Muslims, and your opinion will be respected, even though your Muslim colleagues or your Muslim community members may disagree with you on that. And what this means, the implication of this in terms of law, in terms of established law, is that the authority must create the space of respect for dissent. Now, that aspect established in very, very clear texts in theory by the discourse of the ulama was very clear, that the political authority must respect dissent. However, it is also important to recognize that even though this was the legal position of our scholars and of the scholarly class, it wasn't always followed by the authorities that ran Muslim societies, right? So even though scholars insisted that dissent must be respected, and they did so within their own discourses, this did not then follow and mean and became established in reality that the authorities, the political authorities, the administrative authorities actually respected dissent. In some cases, the political authorities would insist and coerce certain scholars or certain groups of scholars to take on positions that they did not adhere to. One of the most famous examples is the mihna, or the tribulation, if you will, which is what the word mihna means, that Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal had to go through when he held the position with regard to the uncreatedness of the Quran, that the Khalifa of his time, the Abbasi Khalifa, who was the son of Harun al-Rashid, took a contrarian position. And while the contrarian position eventually became part of the majority position, only in a certain aspect of it, nevertheless, at the time when this argument arose, Abu Hanifa, Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal, took a very strong position one way. The Khalifa of the time took it another way, and that could have been left as is. However, the Khalifa of the time insisted that Ahmad bin Hanbal change his position and then persecuted him for it. In fact, Ahmad bin Hanbal died in jail as a result of this particular issue. He was jailed because he disagreed with the Khalifa of the time. So that's the reality of real politics. But the reality of discourse, scholarly discourse, continued to maintain and continues to maintain this respect for dissent. And we need to recognize that and utilize that type of approach and that type of flexibility amongst ourselves. One of the legal maxims that the scholars established as a way of conveying this idea of basing our understanding of text on potential multiplicity of meanings is this statement that says in Arabic, "La hujja ma'al ihtimal." La hujja ma'al ihtimal, which means there can be no conclusive proof as long as the possibility of a contrary argument remains. In other words, if there is a text that allows more than one understanding, then by default, one cannot say that one particular view is better than another particular view. That both views are not equivalent, but both views must not be rejected, or neither view must be rejected, right? La hujja ma'al ihtimal, there can be no conclusive proof as long as the possibility of a contrary argument remains. So as long as the text, or either the text in terms of his meaning or the text in terms of his context, original context, allows for more than one meaning, then all meanings must be in the discourse allowed and protected. And then what meaning prevails is a matter of, again, real politics, and what meaning prevails is a matter of the localization of use of that particular meaning over another meaning that the same text allows. So this is the environment that our scholars developed. They were very rigorous. When they differed with each other, it was on the basis of rigor. And what they were trying to avoid was authoritarianism. In other words, not to be able to insist that because I have physical power of enforcement, that my opinion will rule the day, right? That was what they were trying to avoid. They were not trying to avoid authority, right? Which is a problem in our current society, that we have people with no training or low training or very without any substantial training, simply opining. This is not what is meant by respect of dissent. So if a person who has no training in the Islamic sacred sciences nevertheless establishes a view with no serious argumentation, no serious proof, no serious discourse, and simply says, because I feel like it, I have an opinion on this view. That is not what respect for dissent implies or seeks to establish. We must, any one of us who proposes, and again, this is scholarly discourse on these very weighty matters and difficult matters in some cases, we must present sound authoritative arguments, not merely wishful arguments. Now, how do we apply this in our real lives for non-scholarly subjects? Well, the principle is highly applicable to all of our lives. If we are arguing in a committee or in a community regarding the efficacy of one decision versus another decision, how do we maintain respect for dissent? By providing sound proofs and sound arguments, and not by invoking emotion or rhetoric. And this takes time and this takes practice to establish, but it is a worthy goal, because once you establish this and once you normalize this type of behavior, then interlocutors, you arguing with your brother or your sister, will maintain that discipline of saying what Imam Shafi'i taught us, which is that I am right with the possibility of being wrong, and my sister or my brother is wrong with the possibility of being right. That humility in discourse and that humility in maintaining a position is critical in joining our hearts and in aligning ourselves to doing what's best communally for ourselves. That if my opinion is so strongly held by myself, but I don't have the creative ability to see the value in another person's position, then I deprive myself of the potential of value in another person's opinion on the subject matter. I deprive the community because of my lack of capacity of my abilities to instantiate that alternative point of view. And this is how we harm each other and harm ourselves in the community. So while we should be confident with our own understandings about matters that we disagree with our brothers and sisters, we should also maintain that humility to deeply consider what everybody else is telling us with regard to the matter that we differ with them on. And this is what creates not only good outcomes for us as community, but it brings our hearts together. Imagine I am very confident about my view, but then listening to the arguments of my sister or my brother, I give into that argument. What kind of an atmosphere of communal connection and love and empathy would that create? It would create a highly connected and highly respectful community. So this is a very important skill and a very important idea that our scholars developed in their discourses, which then becomes highly applicable in our daily lives. May Allah guide us to benefit from adab al-ikhtilaf, this science in the Muslim sacred sciences, understand that as it developed, and then have the training and the wherewithal to apply this in our lived experiences, in our communal experiences, in our family experiences. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم في العالمين إنك حميد مجيد عباد الله إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Jazakallah khair, Brother Iftekhar. Thank you so much. As always, mashallah, very insightful and informative. Sister Maha is now going to speak to us about Al-Hayy, one of the beloved names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Sister Maha, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you so much for joining us again.
Thank you. Before we start, do you want to have some questions for Brother Iftekhar? I have a question.
Okay.
I don't know if he's still around. Is he? Yes,
I am. Yes. I'm still here.
Okay. Thank you for this talk. It's quite a fascinating topic and very important. I'm curious whether dissent would be functional if it works in some places but not in others, or on some occasions but not on others. In other words, for it to be functional and productive and beneficial to all, my thinking is that it absolutely have to be accessible at all times on all fronts. Otherwise, it can be misused for that authoritarianism that you warned against.
I would agree with you, Sister Maha. Any good tool, a knife is neutral. It could be used to cut bread with, and it could be used to kill, as we all know. So any one of these tools, and respect for dissent and adab al-ikhtilaf, although it's a very specific science within scholarly discourse, what I've presented is the possibility of using those tools within our lived experiences. But to do that, you need good practitioners, right? So just because we have discussed it doesn't necessarily empower us to understand the classical limits on dissent, the classical openness on dissent. These things would require, in my view, and in the view of those teachers that I've learned with, when we're talking about applying it to our real lives, a bit of training and a bit of understanding of how dissent was practiced. An example that I sort of elucidated on was this restriction. Respect for dissent is not tolerated in matters of heresy, right? Over there, we have to drive towards 100% consensus. Likewise, in matters of other issues, we don't do that, right, in scholarly discourse. So now if you look at that same restrictions, 100% consensus on matters of heresy, but not in other things. And matters of heresy are a tiny portion of the mass of Islamic discourse. So if you apply that to our lived experiences, on what things should we not tolerate dissent? We'd have to define that, right? If we were community, on what things should we not have dissent, and on what things should we have dissent, right? So this is to be defined. This is to be argued, and this is to be, as a community, we have to come to a conclusion. So while the idea of dissent dignifies us as human beings, when there is dissent on fundamentals, community breaks down. So you are absolutely right that we cannot allow dissent, especially when there are authoritarian political entities, because they will come in and in the name of safety and security, this happens all the time, right?
Yeah.
Authoritarian political administrations will tell you, well, I want to make you safe, and therefore there is no dissent. We'll do it one way, and if you disagree with us, you are endangering the whole community, so we will now persecute you and prosecute you. So that is the danger. And that's why the scholars made it very clear that if you argue about something, it's not arguing against authority, whether it is authority of scholarship or authority of administration or politics, but you're arguing against authoritarianism. And the entities in our lived experiences that give in most easily to authoritarianism are political entities, right? Or entities with large amounts of power. In our modern world, it would be these large corporations, some of which have so much money and so much assets that they are bigger than nation states in the world. So yes, there is a huge danger, and its only guardian is an educated community that resists authoritarianism.
Thank you. There are other questions for Brother Iftekhar before I start?
Sister Maha, when starts, this way we make sure we don't run out of time for you.
Okay. So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thanks for having me again here at your weekly Friday gatherings. I always look forward to these Khateras. Let me tell you about a moment from last week that instigated my reflections for today. And the title, my title is First Impressions on God's Name, Al-Hayy, the Ever-Living. I had a disturbing conversation with a Muslim young man who was angry at his parents, especially his father. Enraged, the young brother spewed a disgusting phrase about his father. And hearing that hurt my heart. It weighed heavily on me, but I just prayed for the young man to find guidance and healing for his pent-up rage. As you know, Quranically, respect for parents is huge. There is direct injunction for kindness and gentleness with parents. If there is harm or abuse or pressure to disobey God done by our parents, we should remove the harm or remove ourselves from that harm. However, as we look out for our own wellness, we should do it while still maintaining courtesy to our parents. Days after that disturbing conversation I had with our young friend, his rageful fit was still haunting my consciousness. I wasn't sure whether the young brother meant what he said. He surely did not, did he? I wasn't sure whether the young brother was sorry. He sure was, wasn't he? I wasn't sure whether the young brother would repent, wise up, and clean his attitudes. He sure would, wouldn't he? And thus I was praying for him in my salat prayers during sujood, prostration. A position, as you know, is very deep, a very deep form of connecting to God, and a position conducive for pouring one's heart to God. To my questions, worries, and disbelief about what I had heard that young person say, something happened. I received an inspiration thought about the situation. In that moment, I was reminded of one of God's beautiful names, Al-Hayy. And Al-Hayy means the living, the alive, also the life giver. I have heard this name used a lot in dhikr sessions, but I didn't really quite grip the secret behind attachment to that attribute of God. At least I wasn't aware of its deeper dimensions. It is said that based on one's personal journey, needs, or specific requests to God, different names or attributes of God would be made clearer and closer to the soul, sort of like a revelation or through inspiration. It is also said that the name of God we are in most need for is the greatest or most important name of God for us. Ismullah al-Azam, the greatest name of God, is the name or the attribute we are in most need of at a particular moment. For example, maybe if someone was facing a lot of difficulty, God's name Al-Musahil, the cause of ease, might be closer to that person's consciousness. Or if someone were feeling lonely or isolated, maybe the name Al-Wakil, the best friend, or Al-Wadud, the most loving, or the name the most near, Al-Qarib, could be felt stronger. And if someone was feeling stuck, maybe the name Al-Fattah, the opener, might be what looms most urgent. We get to know God through different ways, and our needs lead us to finding different attributes and names of God, as you know. For me, at that moment I described above, I was worried about the young brother's soul. Was it eclipsed in rage? Was it crumbling? Was it consumed by lack of gratitude? Was it beyond repair? Was it dying? So what do you think the inspired answer was to those questions? When I was saying the dua, بِيَدِهِ الْخَيْرُ وَهُوَ لَا يَمُوتُ, in God's hands is all good, he who does not die, I got reminded of the name Al-Hayy, the alive, God, the living, the ever-living, the non-dying. Having never felt particularly close to that name, and having not done sufficient contemplation or research on this name before, I was surprised and relieved. It was like an answer from Almighty God. I felt the answer was saying something like, Maha, why would you worry about the state of that young brother and the state of his dying soul when there is God who is alive, living, giver of life, resurrector of the dead, and all-powerful, capable of changing any situation from bad to good, from dying to reviving, from eclipse to illuminating. If God is here in capital H, and if God is present in capital P, and if God is everlasting and knower of everything, then why lose hope or even question hope on someone just because of a despicable spoken phrase? Isn't there God? Then there is hope. Isn't there God? Then there is guidance. Isn't there God? Then there is forgiveness. Isn't there God? Then there is everything I could wish for and beyond, for myself and for anyone else. And isn't there God to whom that young brother could turn, seek repentance from, and turn his life around? So I kept repeating that name, Al-Hayy, the ever-living. That dhikr contemplation left me with a sense of relief and appreciation. The ever-living, the most gentle, the most near, the very source of everything good, is totally capable of to remove that young man's rage and turn it into a reforming agent with, of course, the choice and the will of that young man. And let me share a story I heard very briefly from Sheikh Ratib al-Nabulsi, he shared a story about a person who was in deep trouble with the authorities in some country. The person in trouble couldn't go home without risking being arrested for life. So he resorted to a man of influence to help out. That help cost the person in trouble a fortune. But the deal was that the man of influence would help smuggle the person in trouble back in his home country without arrest. Depending on the agreement, the person in trouble set out to travel back home. But something unexpected happened. The man of influence who was paid a fortune had just died. And the person in trouble who had depended on that fortune buying him help and safe return to his home country all went to waste. The arrest took place, and that huge sum of money was lost. The moral of the story is depending on another person for amnesty is like depending on an unstable, disappearing, or dying source. So let's pause here for a second. What scares us? What is arrest for us? What is jail or prison? What jail or prison do we here try to avoid? A prison of loneliness? A prison of depression, maybe? Or anxiety? Or failure? Or misfortune? Or frailty? Or rejection? Or misery? Or sadness? Or dissatisfaction? Or a loveless marriage? I mean, everybody can think of prison or jail in a different way. There are multiple kinds of prisons. Then let's think of who we resort to escape our troubles. Are those sources we resort to deathable? Then we might be in trouble. So I want to ask you what this name Al-Hayy, the ever-living, strike in you. What does it strike in you? And what other names or attributes of God do you feel closer to? I'm going to back to this question, but think of it for now. As I share a short paragraph about the meaning, the name, the ever-living. Allah calls himself Al-Hayy, the ever-living, on 5 occasions in the Quran. Al-Hayy is the one who is everlasting and undying, the one from whom all life arises. Al-Hayy is the one who was, is, and will always be alive. And from another source, the living, the alive, the everlasting, the deathless, the ever-living, the one who is undying, everlasting, the one who is eternally whole and sound, the one life from whom all life arises, the one who calls all life into being, the one who animates all life and who makes each living thing different and distinct. Remember to apply these meanings on a situation that looks kind of closed in and desperate. From the 3-letter root Hayy, Ha-Ya, which has the following classical Arabic connotations: to live, to be living, to become apparent, distinct, to animate, to revive, to vitalize, to call into being, to be whole, sound, to call, summon, invite, and hasten. So we said that the Hayy comes from the root Hayya, which points to 4 main meanings. The first meaning is to live, the second main meaning is to become apparent or distinct, and the third is to revive, vitalize, and call into being, while the fourth main meaning is to be sound or whole. This root appears 184 times in the Quran in 12 derived forms. Examples of these forms are Yuhyi, which means to grant life, Hayyan, which means alive, and Al-Hayatu, which means life. Al-Hayy is the one who has a continuous life with no beginning or end. His life and all his attributes are perfect. His life is self-sustaining and has no external source, whereas our lives have been granted to us by the Creator, Al-Hayy. the one who calls all life into being and the source of to which life will return. And Allah himself says, the Hayy himself says, all faces will be humbled before the ever-living, the sustainer of existence, and he will have failed who carries injustice. The Quran, chapter 20, verse 111. Another ayah, another line, and rely upon the ever-living who does not die. Chapter 25, ayah 58. Another place, he is the ever-living, there is no deity except him, so call upon him, being sincere to him in faith. Chapter 40, ayah 65. So I just wanted to share these first impressions of mine on the name Al-Hayy, and I hope you are inspired to develop a living relationship with this attribute, the ever-living, because to me it was applicable in unexpected ways. Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, would say this application that I want to close with, which I'd like us all to say from our hearts every morning and evening. Whenever a matter would distress him, the Prophet ﷺ would say, "O living, O sustaining sustainer, in your mercy do I seek relief. Ya Hayy ya Qayyum, برحمتك نستغيث. أصلح لنا شأننا كله ولا تكلنا إلى أنفسنا طرفة عين." Don't even, the Prophet ﷺ would ask God, don't leave us to our own selves or to our own devices for even a blink of an eye. Al-Hayy brings us promise of fresh revival at the cellular level to every cell in us, around us and outside us, everywhere. May the alive, ever-living God give you life in the most enlivening way, even in areas which you thought went dead, and even to loved ones whose souls appear to be decaying. Ameen. Ameen.
I mean, mashallah, jazakallah khair, Sister Maha. Such beautiful words, mashallah, and a great reminder for us all. I know one of my favorite names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Al-Wadud.
Yeah.
Mashallah, he's such a loving God. He is the most loving. And, sometimes you love hard and sometimes you love soft. So for me, that's just such a beautiful name. So alhamdulillah. Sister Tahiyya, I'm going to turn it over to you. I know you had some words you wanted to say today.
Sure. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. I also wanted to share, and I did share this with Sister Maha earlier, and I wonder if she could comment on that as well, that this is a name that we often use in our very meditative dhikr that brings us closer to Allah. And the way I experienced it, as I was sharing with you, Sister Maha, was always that even the pronunciation of this name revives us because it's full of breath, right? So it feels like that breath is kind of filling our chest again and coming in and out. So there is something very alive even in the way it sounds, and makes us alive again in the most beautiful and spiritual way. So I don't know if you have any comments, but I always experienced it that way.
What you're saying, Sister Tahiyya, actually sheds light for me, because I know it's used in dhikr, except that I didn't actually understand why it is used. And I knew there was depth of it, apparently. And of course, there is a whole science of sound and the relationship between the mind and the airflow and breath and the control of breath in remembrance of God. So I had a distant relationship and I saw it a lot, but I never understood how it was invoked really. So this is why I chose to share it with you, because it came unexpectedly, and to me it struck me as it couldn't have come from me, because I'm I wasn't attached to that particular name. I'm like Sister Nicole. I like the name Wadud. I like the name Rahim. I love the name Al-Qarib, the near, the close one, the near one. So I'm attached to other names, but to Hayy, I wasn't at all, actually. But it gave me that sense of, this is why I'm calling my talk First Impressions, because now I feel I'm invited to look into the topic deeper and to investigate more. But I didn't want to share with you my investigation. I wanted just to share with you that first impression, so that you as well, hopefully, can open yourselves to other new first impressions with other names of God.
Thank you so much, Sister Maha. I really appreciate that. What I wanted also to share is, and we hope you come back and share with us again, inshallah. But I just wanted to share that we are continuing with our CLD, Community Learning and Dialogue segment of this gathering. And we have a wonderful lineup for the next month. We have really great speakers coming in. What I wanted just to encourage everybody is, if you can reach out to us with proposing topics that are of interest that you would like to hear more about, that some of the previous speakers you would like to come back, or if you have suggestions for speakers in your communities, at your work, or whoever you think would be a good addition to our program, we would really welcome that. So inshallah, stay tuned for the next speakers. We are really excited what's coming up, and also be in touch with your feedback. Even your feedback would be very welcome. Thank you so much. Thank you, Sister Nicole.
No problem. Thank you, Sister Tahia, mashallah. And to echo that, yes, please always email us your thoughts, feelings, suggestions, feedback. We're looking forward to really building this community in your image, subhanAllah. You know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guides us all in different ways, and we want to offer services and provide tools that you need and will use. This community has an opportunity to be special. So we're really looking forward to, mashallah, building it to genuinely serve the community. So please email us your thoughts, put them up on our Facebook page, talk to us individually, however you feel comfortable contacting us. We really are very welcome and open to your suggestions. Jazakallah khair, everyone. So I'm not going to talk about my pumpkin spice latte today because I'm at the beach and I don't feel fallish at all. So I am going to go get some salt air in my lungs and some sunshine on my face and think about pumpkin spice lattes when I'm back in Pennsylvania tomorrow. So inshallah, everyone have a wonderful, wonderful week. Please make dua for each other. Make dua for us, the board of the MLMS. Make dua for me, and I will be making dua for all of you. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala keep you all safe and healthy and happy, inshallah, until we meet again next Jummah, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum, everyone.
Sister Nicole, I want to know what beach.
I'm in Ocean City, New Jersey.
Oh, what's the color of the water?
It's green, not very beautiful here.
Can you send pictures?
I will definitely post a picture, inshallah.
Okay, thank you. Salam
I'll
alaikum.
post a picture to our Facebook page, inshallah.
I'm always interested in hearing everybody's beach experiences.
I've been down here